On the 30th of June 1908, an unidentified object from outer space would crash into the remote Russian region of Siberia. The resulting explosion is the largest impact ever recorded on Earth. It vaporised all life within an 830 square mile radius and flattened over 4,000 square miles of forest, which was around 80 million trees. But when scientists investigated the impact site, all physical evidence of what had crashed had seemingly disappeared. This led to suspicions of a cover-up by the Russian government. Join us as we discuss the mysterious case of the Tunguska Explosion. "39 years before the notorious Roswell incident in New Mexico, there occurred a mysterious event in Russia involving mysterious lights in the sky, followed by a huge and devastating explosion. To this day, the events have never been conclusively explained. It was just after 7 on the morning of the 30th of June 1908 when a mysterious fireball of a bluish light, nearly as bright as the sun, shot across the sky. Moments later there was a flash, producing a billowing cloud, followed by a pillar of fire that cast a red light on the landscape. The pillar split in two and faded, turning to black. About 10 minutes later there was a sound similar to artillery fire. Moments later, witnesses felt an intense heat as far as 40 miles away, which was followed by a loud explosion with a shockwave so powerful that it broke windows hundreds of miles away and knocked people unconscious. The shockwave travelled around the globe twice before it died out. The explosion registered at seismic stations across Eurasia, and the airwaves from the blast were detected in Germany, Denmark, Croatia, and the United Kingdom, and as far away as Washington, DC. Over the next few days, night skies in Asia and Europe were aglow. Londoners, for instance, could plainly read newspaper print at midnight without artificial lights. Remarkably, the Russian government didn't investigate the site for nearly 20 years. At least, not officially. Leonid Kulik was the first scientist to lead a team to investigate the Tunguska event, but this wasn't until 1927, nearly 20 years later. He had read reports of what had happened in Siberia a decade earlier and had become convinced that something extraordinary had happened. He hired local Evenki hunters to guide his team to the centre of the blast area. To their surprise, there was no crater nor any evidence of a meteor or asteroid impact, nor would they find any physical evidence of anything that could have been the cause of the explosion and subsequent devastation. Kulik would conduct 3 more expeditions to the area over the next 10 years, and would never find anything that could conclusively explain what happened in Tunguska. Throughout his investigations, and those of others covering a total of 50 years, there would be no evidence of impacting iron, no impact craters, no meteorite remnant, and no strewn field of particles. The only evidence that anything had happened at all was the toppled and burned trees. A number of subsequent theories have been put forward, the most widely accepted being that the explosion was caused by a comet made up of ice, rock, and methane exploding mid-air in what is known as a meteor airburst. Theories explaining the Tunguska event rely entirely on eyewitness testimonies, and this is where things start to get interesting. The eyewitness accounts of the indigenous peoples living in and around the Tunguska area directly contradicts not only this timeline of events, but also the path the object travelled. According to the observations made by the Ket people, the bright night phenomenon preceded the Tunguska event by at least one night. Nikolai Vasiliev, who was the informal leader of the Tunguska research team, analysed the eyewitness accounts and found that there were literally hundreds of eyewitnesses who described hearing thunder-like sounds not only during and after the flight of the object, but even before the explosion. It gets even stranger when it was found that at least two separate large bright objects were reported in the daytime. One was reported over the Angara River in the morning, while the other was reported over the Nizhny Tunguska River in the afternoon. The reports of the bright object over the Angara River were corroborated by a district police officer. For reference, the Angara River and the Nizhny Tunguska River are 697 miles, or 1,122 kilometers away from each other. It's difficult to understand why hundreds of eyewitness reports were dismissed as unreliable because they didn't fit with the more conventional theories. Perhaps this is because the eyewitness accounts were taken nearly 20 years after the event, and there was an expectation that some accounts could have been misremembered or even embellished over time. Or could there be something else at play? If there was a cover-up, then 20 years would have been more than enough time to dispose of the evidence and sterilise the scene. If the Tunguska event had occurred over a populated area, this would have been an unimaginable catastrophe on a scale never seen before or since. If it had landed in the ocean, its likely tidal waves would have decimated coastal towns and villages. It was incredibly fortunate that the impact site was located in one of the most remote and inaccessible regions on Earth. But some suggest this is too much of a coincidence to be luck, and that the Tunguska event was no accident, and that either it was a craft of some kind that deliberately crash-landed as far away from populated areas as possible, or a weapons test. The blast pattern suggested a weapon explosion, but what weapon could have generated such intense power and devastation? There was no excessive radiation found at the site, which rules out atomic weapons or nuclear-powered craft. And it seems unrealistic to suggest that Russia, or any nation, had the technology to create a weapon that was 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima over 30 years before the atomic bomb was first developed. So what was taking place in the skies above Russia in 1908? The hundreds of eyewitness reports seem to undermine the official explanation of a comet. What were the lights and explosions reported in the skies above before the explosion had even happened? And why has no physical evidence to support any of the theories ever been found? If this was a crashed spacecraft, then it was one of the most successful and elaborate cover-ups of all time. For now though, the mystery of the Great Tunguska Explosion will remain unexplained.